Probably any of us know the stress effects, but just to review what's happening in our body, there's something called our pituitary gland here, and that has a direct connection with our adrenal glands, which sit on top of our kidneys. And when we get stressed, what happens is those adrenal glands start kicking out adrenaline and cortisol, and those have an effect. And as we know, in terms of it can cause our breathing to accelerate, our heart rate to increase, our glucose can be affected, fast breathing, digestion may slow down, our eyelids might dilate, our pupils, our blood pressure may increase, and then even if for some of us who might have tinnitus, that might increase, or you might notice ringing in your ears. And then there's the fight or flight response. So let's look at this a little bit more. So in terms of stress trauma responses, now you can see typically how you may respond to stress. Some of us respond with it with a freeze sensation where we disassociate, we shut down. Some of us may flop, we just go limp, we might faint. Okay. Some of us may be just, we may acquiesce in the moment there, codependent, codependent there, silences, represses ourselves there. Or other of us, we might fight. We might actually fight out, start saying things, and or we might get distracted with things or become addicted to things, overeating or staying busy. And then some of us might actually that's flight. And then some of us might fight, where we might rage out or say something. So you can say these are typical ways that us as human beings have evidence of how we've responded to stress. And some of us, one of those things, or two of those things, or three, might particularly relate to us individually. Okay, but how do we address that? How do we change things there? So we look at in terms of resilience and adaptation. So resilience is the ability to bounce back from a stressor. Now, looking at the body, we may not be as upright as this, but we want to be in position where our muscles are properly toned or things aren't cramping up the way they should. And so if things come along, we can handle it. We can bounce back. What happens when we don't? If we can't bounce back, how we change to survive to a compensated degree. So again, things may start to weather in our bodies where muscles become tighter, our heads may go forward, just in terms of structural, but these things happen internally too. And then, sometimes if we're in a chronic stress stage, bones might start to change shape, arthritic symptoms might occur. Again, that's structural, but then there might be other internal things that are changing too, we're adapting to a degree. So we want to really see what it takes to be resilient. And no matter what state we're in, still, even when we're in an adapted state, we want to see how we can actually change things to be even more to be resilient in greater ways. So addressing stress in a healthy way is our highest leverage for stress, for health. Okay, wouldn't you agree with that? You can nod your head or give your thumbs up. Okay, so personally, I've found that out, but I'm working with people as a healthcare provider. I recognize addressing our stress is our highest leverage for our health. So introducing the HeartMath solution to enhance your resilience, lowers stress cortisol hormones, maintain emotional clarity in the midst of chaos, enhancing a balanced sense of interoception. Now, let me explain what interoception means if you haven't heard that term before. Interoception, a sense that helps you understand and feel what's going on inside your body physically, mentally, and emotionally. So when we get stressed, what we talked about physically, the physical sensations that happen, our mind may be clouded, our emotions may be disturbed there. And we understand that's what's happening, but to have a greater sense, okay, what's happening here? By regularly practicing interoception aware activities, you can improve your ability to understand and then manage your emotions to enhance your whole health. HeartMath can assist with your conscious awareness of interoception with an appropriate balanced response. So again, we're aware of our physical sensations, but what do we do with them? Do we get overly absorbed with them? Or do we have an appropriate balanced response to what's happening inside of our bodies, whether that's our hearts accelerating, if we can recognize, okay, how do we manage that? How do we handle that? How do we respond to that? And this is what HeartMath is about. Okay. So with HeartMath, the principle is the heart sends far more information to the brain than the brain sends to the heart. Just take that in for a moment. The heart sends far more information to the brain than the brain sends to the heart. Typically we would think the other way around, but we're going to see, as I described, if we can get our heart in certain ways of beating, that it allows for our brain to actually think clearer. So let me expand on that. So there's something called heart rate variability, and that's the space of time between each heartbeat. It's the sequence of time between each heartbeat. So there's a heartbeat, then there's a relaxation, then there's another heartbeat, and you can see how it's just slightly different. Okay, that's called heart rate variability. Now, if these times were exactly the same, my understanding, you would be near death. So you want a healthy variability between each heartbeat. And when there is, it again, the term is it helps put you in a state of physiological coherence. And I'll talk more about that. So how it works is when our HRV is looking like this, most likely we're experiencing a state of frustration or anger or discouragement or just depression. You can say any negative attitudes we may experience. This is how our heart rate graphs out to be. And you can say, just looking at that, you can say, wow, I can, it makes sense. However, when we're in a state of appreciation or thankfulness or encouragement or elation, our heart rate graphs out to look like that. And so you can say this way here, we're in the zone. There's a rhythm to our life. There's a certain sense of sequence of being present. This is basically being alive and well. And if we can have our heart beating like that, then we're going to feel, it's going to facilitate the feeling of appreciation and thankfulness. Okay. If our heart's beating like this, it's going to facilitate the experiences of frustration or anger or incapability. Okay. If you have questions, you can note them, and then I'll field them at the end. Okay, so let's look at this. When our heart rate looks like this compared to this. Now, again, the principle is our heart area sends influences to our brain more than our brain sends to our heart. So if our heart is beating in this aberrant way, it's sending information up to our medulla, which influences our blood pressure. So it might increase our blood pressure or influence our digestion. Our ANS is our autonomic nervous system. Okay? It will begin to influence how we remember things. If someone says something to us we didn't like, that can be imprinted in our emotional memory that the part of our brain called the amygdala has an influence with. Okay. But let's look at it in terms of if we're in coherence, if we're in rhythm here, where our heart is beating in its healthy heart rate variability rhythms, it actually sends messages up to the medulla. You can say to help bring balance to your blood pressure. It can actually help, I call it de-imprinting those grooves that may have been there from emotional memories from way back when. You can begin to de-imprint those, which allows for, you can say, thinking, our perspective, our cortex, how we think about things there. If these patterns are stored, these aberrant patterns are stored. When things come up, it's going to automatically trigger something that we may not like. And this relates to what's called adaptation or compensation for old memories here. And then resilience or reserve, building a reserve. And then I wanted to emphasize here with this threat. So again, the amygdala is responsive to threat activation. And that threat activation could be anything you can say in the past that gotten us in terms of grabbed us by the throat or we've reacted to. Immediately that can bring up, I don't like this. I'm gonna respond either freeze, fight, flight, or one of the other things we talked about in terms of how you typically may respond to stress. So we want to change that. We want to deactivate or cause that threat response not to be activated. And how we do that is being in a state of resilience and reserve by having healthy heart rate variability rhythms. Okay. Hope this is making sense. Hope I'm not going too fast for you. Okay. I love this picture, and it was developed by this Dr. Amy Arnston of the Yale School of Medicine. So when we're unstressed, the part of your brain called your prefrontal cortex is in control. And that's influencing all this back brain. You can say the middle brain, the limbic brain, the brain stem there. But when we get stressed, what happens again, that amygdala starts to fire and starts to push basically into the influences of our prefrontal cortex. And this is where our mind gets confused, chaotic. We can't think straight because this is what's happening physiologically. So we're beginning to see, hopefully I'm presenting a picture where, okay, if I can get my heart beating in its right way, then I'll have more perspective. So the part of my brain that gives me a sense of understanding or perspective is in control, rather than for having, you can say, our emotional brain in control. And also they call it the brain stem, which relates to if we're feeling threatened for our safety. The folks in New Jersey having that unexpected earthquake, their safety was threatened, and that caused the confusion and caused that amygdala to be overridden. Okay. A little twist with this too. When we meet someone, almost immediately, even before we may think about the person, we'll have a sensing, we may have a sensing that person's a threat, because actually part of our sensory awareness picks that up before actually our conscious awareness will, and we'll feel that in our heart. Okay. There's more I can talk about on that, but we'll move through this a little bit more. Okay, so how do we change our future, like past, present, future? If in the moment, just in the moment, if we can get coherent, where we're actually in a state of that healthy heart rate variability rhythms, then something extends out from us that is sound, that is coherent there. And then you can say all of us have had aberrant backgrounds, aberrant past backgrounds, but we can leave that behind. So there can be a sense of changing our future, changing the patterns we've had in the past by becoming coherent in the present moment, or something out of the future can be experience of a sense of trust that things can work out, all is well. Okay, so how to become more coherent? The big idea. Okay, so I'm going to go through a few slides in terms of, okay, how do we become more coherent as a starting point for each of us? So they call it in HeartMath quick coherence technique basics. And it relates to heart, feeling, focused breathing, which shifts your attention away from your mental chatter. So through HeartMath, they found, and through using technology, if you simply focus your conscious feeling attention on your heart area, it helps to take the spin out of the accelerated spin out of your head when things happen. So just placing your feeling conscious attention on your heart area. Now, for some people, putting their hand on their heart helps bring that awareness. Other folks who may have had heart conditions, that might actually cause a threat response. Okay. But just to start with, there's other ways around that if that's the case. But for those who can, just have a sensing. You put your hand on your heart and feel, consciously feel that's where your heart is. Get the sensation of that. Okay, that's a starting point. The starting point to actually de-accelerate, you can say, the mental spin that happens when you get stressed. Now, if you're out and about, or you can put your hand on your heart if things happen like that, or just having a more conscious awareness of your heart area, like feeling attention there, that can be done that way too. Okay. And then the next part is considering what makes you smile. What do you love for sure? Uh, Jim, this is our cat. Katniss. We love our cat. You we love our cat. But it's in feeling. Feel the feeling. Okay. Now, with HeartMath, it delineates itself from an intellectual practice. Instead of this being all a mind thing, it's not a mind thing. It's actually more of a feeling thing. To feel the feeling. So consider what makes you smile. What do you love for sure? Usually, I encourage folks as I work with them one-to-one with this work, is I encourage them to write an emotional, coherent inventory, to write down as many things as they can that bring them a feeling of what they love for sure. You know? Sometimes we forget those things. And if we can, sometimes having them close on hand, having them up, that it gives us quick access to a coherence type sensation. Okay, so these are the steps. This is the practice. First is heart focused breathing, slow in and slow out. So how it works is hands on our hearts here. Usually have put your feet flat on the floor. Okay. And then imagine breathing. Imagine your nose being on your heart and you're breathing in slow and out slower. Let me just explain the reason for that. When you breathe in slow and out slower, it activates what's called your parasympathetic nervous system, which helps to bring a sense of calm. So let's just practice a little bit. Let's breathe in and imagine your nose being on your heart, or place your conscious feeling attention there, and breathe in slow through your heart and then out slower through your heart. And breathing in slow and out slower. And one more time. Okay, now that's a start. That's a start. The second part is activate a positive or renewing feeling. Feel what makes you smile. Heart focus, breathe the positive feeling of emotion. We take a sip of water. Okay, so continue hands on your hearts. Upright yourself. Another part I recognize too, if we upright ourselves, it puts us in position, a commanding position to actually help actualize this. So as we're breathing in slow and out slower, if you like, you can close your eyes if you like. Feel a feeling. Consider something that makes you smile. Feel that feeling. Consider something that makes you smile. It could be flowers. It could be your pet. It could be a memory of a conversation you may have had with someone. Yeah. Feel, feel the feeling, the positive feeling from wherever you may have experienced that. Breathe that feeling in through your heart. And then look to breathe it out through your heart or even out of your whole body. Breathing it in and breathing it out. Breathing it in And breathing it out. One more time. Okay, okay. So that's basically a central practice of heart math. Okay? And hopefully you may have touched some of the feeling with that here. It does take some practice, like we just did. We just practiced that. But let's look again, further steps here to help lock this in consciously with us is practice. Practice, it's a state of practice, a state of coherence. So it does take something. A state of coherence takes practice to become an embodied trait. So with heart math, we recognize it takes practice to become an embodied trait to raise your coherent baseline. So you can say you have a certain baseline here, and certain things may come along that may have triggered you there. But if you can get to a point where instead of those things that your baseline is actually below the trigger, you raise your baseline. So those things that typically before got you, they're underneath that. So you have perspective when they start to arise, where you can change it, you can dissipate it just by your conscious perspective, because you can say your prefrontal brain is actually in control. Your understanding there. Now, in terms of looking at that, in terms of that, the triggers, this next slide is a bit on the slide, but just stay with me. I'll explain it. There's something called subconscious emotional memory override. And that's when things like hate, worry, guilt, judgment, fear, those things accumulate. They accumulate slowly into something called subconscious memory override occurs. I know this is big terms here, but when that occurs, then leads to an unhealthy physiology leading to ill health. So you can say the cause of disease, this ease there, really comes back to when these feelings build up. And right now, like you might recognize certain things that you do worry about that may have built up. But here what we're talking about is how do we get to the point where we raise our coherent baseline so that these things begin to be seen in perspective. So in terms of how many times a day do you experience the below? Okay. Also, like sometimes this line here, if there's an intensity, a quick intensity of a loss of a person, a pet, short time, high intensity, like how do we handle those things that may come along, like an earthquake? So heart math, practicing heart math prevents subconscious emotional memory override by dissipating the above, establishing a coherent baseline. Okay. So this is like basically, how do we deal with all these things? It's raising our baseline, and that's what heart math is about. Okay. And then practice. Now, part of the practice is there's tools, there's technology. Seeing is believing. Seeing the visual evidence of the changes in the body can reinforce the practice and accelerate the progress. So with your phone, the Android or iPhone, there's a sensor you can connect to it and actually practice to see if you're in a state of coherence by how it registers. It will show you. This bottom one, this for folks who don't want to use their phone, they don't, they're thoughtful of EMF type influences. This is what I use every morning. EM Wave 2, it's battery powered, and I'll use it while I lightly exercise in the morning. And that's my practice every morning, practice. So my practice is on a daily basis. So to continually cultivate a coherent embodiment for myself. And I know as I do that, then I can address health conditions that may come along. I can be more perspective of what's happening in my relationships or the people that I work with there. And then overall, though, as we do practice more and more and we embody those traits, then we come to a point of mastery. And mastery takes time. Where we get to a point you can say where nothing bothers us or phases us, but that's a high aspiration, but that's the direction. That's you can say an aspirational direction to move in. Okay. So the essence of heart math. Now, in terms of heart math, you just think of the words heart math. One and one is two, as remembered as kids, remember? But in terms of emotional heart math, is a poem from a mentor of mine, Martin Cecil. And this epitomizes what I sense heart math's about. Any moment of hating, any moment of lying, any moment of resentment is a moment of dying. Any moment of loving. Okay, this is a little emotional here. Any moment of loving, any moment of giving, any moment of thankfulness is a moment of living. All our moments add together like the digits in a sum, and the answer tells us plainly whether life or death shall come. Okay. Okay. I've just touched, this poem touches my heart. But to me, it's the essence of heart math. Any moment of loving, giving, thankfulness is a moment of living. We want to accumulate those type feelings, those type attitudes. We want those attitudes to accumulate. And as we do, then we live, you know, whether life or death shall come. We have an experience of life, you know, not a dying experience. Okay. To look at it and to illustrate that a little bit more picture-wise, you could say each of us has a certain, you can say, not sun nature to ourselves, and that sun nature needs to be received into our heart. And the way it's received into our heart is by holding, keeping, cultivating attitudes of thankfulness, appreciation, patience. Okay? And then our mind basically is to protect our heart, to maintain that. And I like this picture I've come across. Our mind is really to hold the umbrella over our heart. So that sun is still shining in our experience. Okay? You can say our mind is to be cultivated as our guardian angel for our heart. Okay? And I thought this was a good graphic in terms of our mind has a job. You can say our mind is the software of our brain. And as we keep that software and the physiology of our brain in the right way, in right attitudes, because we're protecting our heart to keep those right attitudes, those right healthy attitudes. Okay, when that's the case, we have an enhanced conscious awareness of interoception for self-regulation. Okay, like I mentioned about interoception before, an enhanced conscious awareness of interoception for self-regulation, which allows us to find our calm. And it allows our body vitality. And as we know, if you can say the nature of ourselves, the essence of ourselves, the spirit of ourselves, is actually affirmed in our heart because we're keeping our heart rate rhythms in healthy ways, and our mind is protecting that. You can say when our heart and mind are aligned, it allows for, you can say, the energy that should move through our body to infiltrate it, which allows for a sense of vitality within our system. And then ultimately, it's extending an integrated life-giving influence. So what I love about heart math, it helps us individually, but also calls to us a greater sense of purpose in terms of really the end aim for all of us is to extend an integrated life-giving influence. Okay? And when we're doing that, we're ultimately doing that, then it moves us in a direction of health, of greater health, of greater ability to get over things, whether it's emotional things or physical things, physical health conditions, or at least have them in perspective, to live a life-filled life. Okay, so heart math meditation application. I've given you a bit, so let's do a little meditation to help make this a little more visceral for you. So if you want, you may want to put your hand on your heart if you're like to there. I like to close my eyes when I do this. And if you want to just move with me as I have a meditation together with you, with all of us here. So uprighting ourselves, feet flat on the floor, breathing in slow, out slower, breathing in slow, out slower, and having a sense of this moment now, having a sense of being aware of what it takes in a keener sense of what it is to have perspective, what it is to see the things that may have triggered us in the past, and begin to pop our head above water, or we have a greater sensing that we can handle things or see things in a way that doesn't cause our health to be affected or our minds to be jaded there, and our hearts to be in a state of greater appreciation for the life that we have now. So let's breathe. Breathe again. Let's breathe the feeling of that, however you can relate to it, whether it's the smallest way or in the largest way. Again, these things take time to reestablish themselves. And if it's hard to actually feel a positive feeling, that's okay. But just to allow for that seed at least to plant in consciousness. As we allow for a seed of a coherent seed to plant within our, you can say, our subconscious or our heart, and allow that to be protected by our mind, that we can sense, we can have a greater sense of life awareness, an experience of life awareness. So as we breathe in slow, breathe out slower, we give a sense of thankfulness. We feel a sense of thankfulness for affirming what really matters. What really matters, that helps us individually and helps us together as we extend, know more what it means to extend a healthy influence. And here's our call to meaning, and you can say the essence of our lives is a call to greater meaning, a greater meaning to each other, and a greater meaning, a sense of meaning within ourselves. Let's breathe, however you can relate to it. Let's breathe the feeling into our hearts and out through our whole bodies. And breathe as you would, in and out. One more time. And out. Okay. There's always more. So if you have an interest, according to your interest, if you want to learn more about stress mastering with HeartMath, actually overall with a greater sense of related to health, there's a program I put together, and I have a 6-week HeartMath training with me, 1-to-1 there, using this program I've developed that we would review after each session to see how we can go deeper with it. And then if you're interested, you can contact me at drsteveventola at Mindsprint. I think most of you have my email, my phone number. And then I've learned how to do a little bar graph. You can take a picture of that.